Reading now from the first chapter of the Gospel according to John. I'll be reading selected verses of that chapter. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and the life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. The true light that shines on all people was coming into the world. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. As the law was given through Moses, so grace and truth came into being through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, God the only Son, who is at the Father's side, has made God known. It's so good to be in worship with you this evening on this Christmas Eve. It's at the end of our Advent series where we have been looking every Sunday at this chapter of John's Gospel. And every Sunday in this series, we've been focusing on one of the prominent words in this first chapter. Words that are favorite words of the Gospel, words that appear throughout the Gospel and have prominence in it. Words like light and believe and receive and life. And tonight, the word grace. Grace. John says that through him, that is through the Word, the mind, the heart, the will of God, the Word, which is made flesh in Christ and makes his home with us, through his fullness, we have received grace upon grace. Grace. It is a beautiful word. It's a word that's prominent not only in this chapter of John, but in our faith. A word that takes center stage in our understanding of God. In fact, it's in this same breath that John uses this word grace that he says, no one has ever seen God. And it's true. No one has ever seen God. We know that's true. In fact, it's that statement, no one has ever seen God, that causes so much difficulty for us for whom seeing is believing, right? We say that. And even more so, to say that no one has ever seen God is the statement that causes so much difficulty in the way we get along with one another throughout our world. Most of our religious strife comes down to this idea that no one has ever seen God. And because we stop at that idea that no one has ever seen God, we have this blank canvas, and people want to paint on that blank canvas a portrait of God as they wish. So sometimes God is seen as distant and far off and far removed. Sometimes God is seen as the unmoved mover that is someplace immovable, unaffected by anything that we might say or do. Maybe God is the great watchmaker who put all of this mechanical universe together and then goes off someplace as it runs itself. Or maybe God is a petty tyrant who is playing people against one another, or is always ready to reward and punish certain people. I mean, if the canvas is blank and people can paint God however they wish, those are the kinds of things we come up with. And we fight about those things. In fact, sometimes when we begin to paint on that blank canvas, we begin to realize that what we're painting is a self-portrait. God looks a lot like we do. God acts like we do, cares about the things we care about, has the emotions we have, has our values, has the same judgment about who's good and who's not, and who's in and who's out, and who's the friend and who's the enemy, and so on and so on. But you see, John doesn't stop with that sentence, no one has ever seen God. He goes on and says, no one has ever seen God. But God, the only Son, who is beside the Father, He has made God known. If you want to know what God looks like, look at Jesus, John is saying. If you want to know the nature of God, the will of God, the way of God, look at Jesus' life and Jesus' teaching. Because Jesus reveals God to us. In fact, more than that, one of the names of Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. John says the Word became flesh and made His home among us. God, the only Son, who is beside the Father, He has made God known. And so if you want to know what God is like, it's not a blank canvas. It's not a canvas that we paint in our own image. Someone has said a long time ago that God created humanity in God's own image, and ever since then we've been trying to return the favor, to create God in our image. But what John is saying, no, the very image of God we see in Jesus, in His life and in His teaching. When I think about that, when I think about John's statement that we have received from His fullness grace upon grace, then I cannot help but think of one of the teachings of Jesus. Jesus' teaching, it's in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and he notices that there are some religious authorities, some religious leaders who are grumbling. And what are they grumbling about? Well, they're grumbling because they have noticed that tax collectors and sinners, those whom they had deemed outcasts, were associating with Jesus. Jesus was welcoming them. In fact, Jesus was sitting down at the table and eating with them. And it's just not done. I mean, the religious authorities had painted on their canvas a picture of God that was much, much smaller than that lived out in Jesus' life and taught in His teachings. And so it's in response to their grumbling that Jesus tells three parables. And they're parables of lostness and being found. Parable of the lost sheep, parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son that we usually call the parable of the prodigal son. And Jesus said that there's a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of them is missing, and so he leaves the 99 in the fold securely and goes out searching for the one. Now, he's got 100 sheep. There's only one missing. But he cares about that one, and he searches diligently until he finds the one. That's what God is like, Jesus said. Or God's like a woman with 10 coins. And she loses one of the coins, and she lights a lamp, and she sweeps, and she searches throughout the house until she finds it. Yes, she has 10 coins, but the one is precious. Or God is like the father who has 2 sons, and the younger of the son demands his inheritance and leaves home, abandons the farm, abandons the father and the other son, takes the inheritance, squanders it, and disgraces the family, does not deserve to even be hired back as a hired hand. But what happens? When he crawls back to his father, planning to beg perhaps to be allowed to be a hired hand, the father runs to meet him and embraces him. And Jesus is saying God is like that. Grace upon grace. The opportunity when lost to be found. The opportunity when you have even marched away intentionally to be welcomed back. And in all three instances, there's a great celebration and a newness of life. It is the good news of the second chance, the new beginning. It's no wonder we've been looking at Christmas movies in this season. It's no wonder that so many of them feature this theme, don't they? Of transformation, of some kind of change of heart, of a new beginning. Because that's at the heart of what we celebrate tonight. One of the movies, also in the form of plays, stories that echo the theme, is A Christmas Carol. It perhaps is the story in all of Christmas fiction that really lays out this idea of grace upon grace. You know, we meet Ebenezer Scrooge. Scrooge is described as a squeezing, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard as flint, from which steel had never struck generous fire. Secret and solitary as an oyster. That's Scrooge. But by the end of the story, he is the best friend and the best man that the good old city has ever known, or any city for that matter, Dickens wrote. What changed? It was the opportunity to begin again. It's that wonderful moment when he has relived some of his painful past and he has looked at the plight of those that he has ignored in his present, and he looks toward a future that is bleak. And the greatest moment is when he realizes that he can change that future. That there's an opportunity to start again. That he can be different. And it taxes his strength, doesn't it? He even says, Spirit, I haven't the power. I haven't the power. Well, the good news of our faith is that grace, as we see it in the Gospels, is not just forgiveness and not just mercy or unconditional love of God. It is all those things. But it's more than that. It is the power when we are at our weakest to live a new life, to start over, to have a new beginning, to change, to be who God calls us to be. Grace upon grace upon grace. And we see that in Ebenezer Scrooge. We see it in all of the Christmas stories that are told in all kinds of ways. All of the favorite movies have this theme of transformation. And friends, we can see it in the lives of one another this evening. So many people in this room could stand up right now and tell their own story of grace upon grace upon grace. And before we leave tonight, I want you to embrace that word and take it with you this evening, knowing that whatever is going on with you, wherever you are in your life, that there's always the opportunity to begin anew, to begin again, to receive once again the life that Jesus came to bring us. Well, as we go from this place, I want us to go with a kind of blessing. And it comes from Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens wrote these words, and they're incorporated into a stage version of A Christmas Carol. They're words spoken by Bob Cratchit to his family. And they're words that lift up something of the meaning of this season and of what it means in our lives and dealing with our past and our future, and also with the gift of mercy and grace. Listen as Bob reads these words for us.
All right then. Quiet now. I don't know quite where to begin. Now, when I listen to you talk about your hopes, I can't but think how Christmas changes as we grow older. Time was when I was young, when Christmas Day was like a magic ring around the world. It bound together all my enjoyments, affections, hopes. And seeing everything and everyone around a Christmas fire was all I ever wanted. And then, the time comes when someone very dear, very beautiful, draws you to the hearth where they sit. And Christmas is a time to dream of the things that are to be. All your aspirations, so very real, even if they should come to little or nothing. And it's easy in these times to look back on the things that never were and conclude that life is little better than a dream and little worth the loves and the strivings that we crowd into it. And yet, I see here a boy before whom stretches a future brighter than we ever looked on. I see a girl with curls around her face like that long ago first love. And another, yes, and another, who remind me that Christmas is still a magic ring if it binds us all together. Therefore, as we grow older, let us be thankful that the circle of our Christmas memories expands. Welcome our old aspirations, which we may yet think impossible. We have not outlived you yet. And welcome new projects and new loves to their place by the hearth. Welcome what has been and what never was and what we may hope to be. All our bright visions of Christmas Day. For this is the season of immortal hope and the birthday of immortal mercy, and we will shut out nothing. Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us. Everyone.